Hello everyone, this is Iran Talk, and in this video I'd like to take a look at the genetic origins of the Carthaginians. For those of you who don't know, Carthage was a very powerful ancient civilization that was a rival to Rome for a very long time. The Carthaginians were based in the city of Carthage, which is now located in Tunisia. The genetic findings that will be analyzed in this video are from a recent study published in Nature Communications on the genetic origins of the Punic people, including those of Carthage. Before I get into the genetic analysis, however, here is a map of Carthaginian civilization at its peak, and you can see that it spanned much of the coastal part of North Africa as well as central and southern Spain. What's not shown on this map, however, are the conquests of Hannibal Barca, the most notable Carthaginian general and leader, and these were mostly in southern Italy, so unfortunately this map does not show them. And speaking of Hannibal, here is a Roman bust of him from the city of Capua, and you can see that he has a very Mediterranean phenotype and his Levantine features seem to be very little. Unfortunately, Hannibal was defeated by the Romans, and by 146 BCE, the city of Carthage was sacked by Rome, and the citizens were either enslaved or massacred. Now, I would like to get into the analysis of the genetic study. The study, published in Nature Communications, which is a leading scientific journal, was titled Punic People Were Genetically Diverse with Almost No Levantine Ancestors. Here is the abstract of the study, and I will not read it, but to summarize it, 210 individuals were sequenced. Of these, 196 were from 14 sites that were traditionally identified as Phoenician and Punic, and these were from the Levant, from North Africa, from Iberia, from Sicily, from Sardinia, and from Ibiza, and there was also an early Iron Age individual from Algeria. What was found was that the Punic individuals analyzed had no Levantine ancestry, and the North African contribution was also minimal, with the majority coming from an Aegean Sicily-like source dating back to the Bronze Age, such as the Mycenaeans. Despite this, however, towards the end of this video, I will show that utilizing the Global 25, it's apparent that the Carthaginian samples had a bit of Levantine ancestry, and you will see that it was in no way insignificant. However, before I do that, I would like to take a look at the rest of the key findings from this study. Here is a map from the study, and you can see that it highlights the location of the sites from which the samples were taken from, including 2 original Phoenician sites, and the remainder of the sites are from the Carthaginian Empire's greatest extent and sites that are traditionally associated with Punic civilization. Here is the principal component analysis, or PCA, featured in this study, and you can see that the Phoenician samples that were sequenced cluster closely to the Bronze Age Canaanites, whereas the Punic samples are in between Aegean populations as well as North Africans, with a bit also clustering with Iberia and 2 clustering in Central Europe. And this is very interesting, and this shows that the Punic people were very diverse, but they had very little influence from the Levant, and despite this they did have some North African ancestry, and this shows interactions between the Punic and Southern European settlers and the indigenous population of North Africa. What's more is that the majority of the samples from the Punic sites of Carthage and Kirkwan cluster with Aegean populations and not North African populations. And as further evidence for these findings, the study featured admixture panels for the various populations of Punic descent from the Levant, from North Africa, as well as from Southern Europe. And you can also see to the right there, the different time periods are also labeled and color-coded, as are the individual components, which for the North African component, it's in yellow, the Iran Neolithic component is in pink, the Levant Bronze Age component is in dark red, the Iberia Sardinia component is in green, the Steppe component is in grey, and the Greece Sicily Bronze Age component is in dark blue. And as you can see, for the majority of these samples, the ancestry is derived largely from a Greece Sicily Bronze Age source. Here is a close-up of the admixture breakdowns for the Carthaginians, and these samples are from 450 BCE to 170 BC, and you can see that the majority of their ancestry derives from a Greece Sicily Bronze Age source. What's more is that these samples seem to have no Levantine ancestry and have a bit of Iran Neolithic ancestry as well, alongside minor amounts of steppe, Iberia, Sardinia ancestry, and there's also very minimal North African ancestry, though in 3 of the samples it is somewhat significant nonetheless, in the others it is minimal. Thus, what these findings seem to indicate is that on a genetic level, the ancient Carthaginians were primarily a Mediterranean population descending largely from Eastern Mediterranean and Aegean settlers. Despite this, however, here is another admixture panel from the same study, and you can see that in this one, the Carthaginians have significant Levantine ancestry, which is represented here in green. Though this is also the same representation used for the Iran Neolithic component, nonetheless, I feel that the Carthaginians did indeed have some Levantine ancestry that was unfortunately baked into the Aegean component, and this will actually become more evident when I take a look at the G25 results. And another interesting aspect discussed in the study was that the North African ancestry was below 50% in all individuals except for 3 from Kirkwan, 2 from Villaricos, and 1 from Taros. And even in North Africa, 10 out of the 27 individuals from Kirkwan and 5 out of the 17 individuals from Carthage can be modeled with no indigenous North African ancestry, and 84% of individuals from these sites have more than 50% Sicilian Aegean ancestry, and this was actually the dominant component. And what this shows is that on a genetic level, the indigenous North African ancestry was minimal in these ancient Punics. Despite the minimal North African ancestry, the Punic population still exists on a cline between Northwest Africa and Europe, and the majority of the samples fall in the Aegean and European clusters. Nonetheless, there are some that are more tilted towards Northwest Africa, but these are minimal, as you can see that the great majority of them are just largely an Aegean population with little to no Levantine input and also little to no Central European input as well. That is essentially it for my analysis of this genetic study, and up next I will be utilizing the Global 25 to provide a more in-depth exploration of the samples that were sequenced and featured in the study. Here are the source populations I will be utilizing, and this calculator was actually developed by my good friend Balka Group, so I'd like to thank him for that. And you can see that there's a Southern European component, an Aegean component, a Levantine component, as well as a Berber component. And as you can see with the dates specified, these are ancient source populations. In fact, Balka Group created these components utilizing related populations for each one of these individual source populations, so do keep that in mind. For those of you wondering, Balka Group is the alias of my friend on Discord, so I just wanted to mention that since you may be wondering who this individual is. Here are the results for the Tunisian Punic samples, and you can see they're on average 42% Southern European, 33.4% Levantine, 15% Aegean, and 9.6% Berber. Thus, with these results, you can see significant ancient Levantine input, and this is in contrast to the findings of the study. Here is the ancient distances chart for the Tunisia-Carthage Punic sample set, and you can clearly see that the majority of the samples are either Southern European populations heavily admixed with Levantines or North African populations that have significant Southern European admixture, and this perfectly matches the profile of the Carthaginian Punics. Now here is the modern distances chart, and you can see that the closest population to the Tunisia-Carthage Punic sample set are the Maltese as well as the Sicilians, followed by southern Italian populations and then some Jewish populations as well. And what this means is that genetically the Punic Carthaginians were closest to contemporary southern Europeans that also have significant Levantine and a bit of North African ancestry as well. And what's more is that while modern day North African populations do not make this chart, the Algerian and Moroccan Jews do, and this is very interesting. Here are the G25 results for the remaining samples from this study. These averaged sample sets are from Sardinia and Sicily in Italy, Andalusia and Ibiza in Spain, and Kirkwan in Tunisia. They're on average 41.6% Southern European, 29.6% Aegean, 18.1% Levantine, and 10.7% Berber. Thus, even the Punic sample sets from sites other than Carthage seem to be primarily of Southern European and Aegean descent. Despite this, the majority of them have a bit of Levantine and Berber ancestry as well. For these reasons, the Punics seem to largely have been a Mediterranean population in terms of their genetic origins. Before I conclude, I just like to state that in the supplementary information of the study, a chart of 12 individuals broken down utilizing QPADM can be found, and once again you can see that from Carthage they seem to have significant Levantine ancestry alongside Southern European ancestry, and this is very interesting. And what's more is that in the other sites they seem to have a bit of North African ancestry as well. Nonetheless, once again, the majority of the ancestry for the majority of the Punic samples from across North Africa and Southern Europe seem to have significant Southern European ancestry, and this is very interesting. To conclude, the Carthaginians were a population primarily descended from Southern European and Aegean populations with only minor influence from Levantines as well as North African indigenous populations, and this is according to a recently released study in Nature Communications. And these findings are largely corroborated by the Global 25 calculator, though with elevated Levantine ancestry. Finally, the study took a look at samples from Punic sites other than Carthage, and they also had a similar makeup to those who were from the city. That is it for this analysis. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.